Hello, everybody. Welcome to the now, unfortunately, very common Zoom world that we all live in. Thank you all very, very much for joining us. As you'll see, I'm joined by lots of my colleagues here at 39, and we are very grateful for you joining us today. We're sorry that it's not in person, but what we'd like to do today is to give you a little bit of a feel of what 39 Essex Chambers is all about, why you might want to join us, or why you might not want to join us, and how you apply for pupillage. And hopefully this will be useful for you applying for all different sets, but obviously also for 39. So we're doing it on Zoom because of COVID, obviously. There are no pupillage fairs, aren't looking quite the same as they were. We really hope that this will be an opportunity for you to get to know us a bit better and get a feel for us. You can see some of us are at home, some of us are in chambers. So we actually have kept chambers going all the way through lockdown. We've had a skeleton staff here every single day. I think I've been in every single day. I know Hannah and Sheraton have been in a fair amount. We're very lucky because we've got a very big building on Chancery Lane, number 81 Chancery Lane. So we've been able to follow all the government guidance, where we've been able to be very careful because we've got a very big building. We've got lots of very, very possible to socially distance. So we've been pretty lucky on that. Ruth, I think, are you in chambers today as well?
I am indeed, and I just saw my plants actually look really healthy, much healthier than the plants in my house, so a bit off-putting.
Yeah, Chris, I think, is definitely in chambers. He's one of our current pupils. And I know Hannah is in one of our conference rooms upstairs. So we've got a very big conferencing suite upstairs, which when COVID came in, we transferred to media suites. And so we do our podcasting, all our media stuff from there, and then also virtual hearing rooms. Please do ask questions. I know that you can only ask them on the question function, but please do ask the questions and we'll try and answer them as we go through, or at the end. If we run out of time, then, I can send out answers, or we can send out answers to you. But please do, the more you ask, the more you'll get out of it. So no question is a stupid question. If you were here, I'd be encouraging you to do it in person. The other thing that I'd be showing you is a trip around, around what a barrister's chambers look like, in case you haven't seen one. And so you're just going to have to, thankfully, Colin is also in chambers, so you can see what his room looks like. His is very smart and tidy. Not all barristers' rooms are. So yeah, you get a bit of a feel for us as we go through. So yeah, do ask us as many questions as you can. So you'll have seen that we're going to talk about what life is like here at 39 as a pupil, how second, sixth and early years are managed, what the kind of practice areas we have here, what our pupil supervisors are looking for, and how you actually apply. We hope that's useful. We've been doing these for a few years now, in person and then on Zoom. It is good to get your feedback, so you can put that in the Q&A as well, because then we can change it for the next time we do it. So if there's something else that you think would have been helpful to know about, or we spoke too much about something you didn't know about, then let us know. I'm not going to give you a big history of 39 because you can look it up, and it's much more important that you get to speak to our great our people. So I'm going to hand over straight away to Nyasha and Chris. Now, Nyasha, I'm going to come to you first. I don't know how you've split it up between the two of you, but I'd quite like you just at the beginning to tell everybody what your route to the bar was. Why did you come to the bar, and what stage are you at now? Oh, and we can't hear you. Okay, we're going to start with Chris. You're going to go and get your headphones, and I'm going to start with Chris. Chris, so Chris is one of our current pupils. We've got 2 this year. Kiara was going to be on as well, but she's been dragged away to an emergency court application. So Chris, thank you very much for standing in. Chris, what was your route to the bar?
Yeah, so despite the lack of accent, I'm originally from Cumbria in the northwest of England. I went to a state school, took a year out before uni, where I worked an exotic job at a supermarket for a year and volunteered at a local law centre. I then studied at University College London, and I applied for a mini in my final year, so 2019. and then thought I'd chance it and applied for pupillage in my final year as well in January 2020. And I was lucky enough to get taken on. And then I started in 39 in September last year.
Yeah, right in the middle of COVID.
Yeah.
And you've been in most days, haven't you?
Yeah, so I've been in pretty much every day other than, going out for hearings or the inevitable COVID isolations that unfortunately we all have to go through these days.
Yeah. Nyasha, whoa, you've moved, disappeared, having issues. Okay, yeah, 5 minutes. Yeah, very sorry. Okay, Chris, tell us what life is like at the pupil at 39.
Yeah, so I plan to go through sort of a whistle-stop tour of my experience of the interview process, the pupillage structure, and my experience of first six so far. Obviously, I'm not sure how interviews, etc., will be structured this year, so it's all very much based on my own experience. In my case, having applied in January 2020, everything changed very quickly in March when COVID occurred. So my first round was held over the phone in late March 2020, and I found out about a fortnight before that. It was a 15-minute phone call, and the interview was based primarily around a recent-ish Supreme Court decision. So it was with 3 members of Chambers. Shamefully, I can't remember who interviewed me over the phone. I didn't have the benefit of faces to add up to names. I was asked about whether I thought the decision was correctly decided, challenged on a couple of my views on that. And I was also asked some questions about my general experiences that I put in the pupillage form, what I thought the legal impact of COVID would be and things like that. And there was the opportunity to ask questions myself at the end. I did that in both interviews, probably just because I was excessively nosy with little else to do in my time. But it was very useful to be able to speak to members of Chambers in that respect.
And when you got here, what would you tell people about, what's life as a pupil been like? How has it been structured?
Yeah, so I mean, the pupillage process is structured in terms of you get 4 seats. So you see all of Chambers practice areas in as much detail as you can cram into 10 weeks. So I started.
And where are you at now?
I'm currently in the civil liabilities group, which is personal injury and clinical negligence, which is my second seat.
He has to be careful what he says because I'm his supervisor. So I'm not taking notes or anything, no pressure. At the moment, I'm his supervisor. He's loving it. He's loving this speech.
Yeah, 2 of my supervisors are on the call currently. Yes, I think Judith's here as well. But in terms of what you do in the seats, the aim is that you see the breadth of that practice area, you assist your supervisors, and as far as I'm aware, sort of 99% of your work will be for your supervisors. There's a genuine effort to ensure that you're not overwhelmed or that you're touted around Chambers as a free source of research. Now and again, if it's appropriate, you can do research for the members. I've done 1 bit of sort of discrete legal research, which is always interesting as well. In terms of the work that I've done, this seat is probably a good example that shows the breadth. Most of the work I've done is live, so as in helping, I like to think helping, with ongoing actual cases. I've done everything from legal research, pre-action work, pleadings, so particulars of claim, defences, schedules of loss, counter schedules, advice on liability and advice on quantum. I've also managed to sit in on 3 or 4 conferences. My very first one was in person with, I think it was about 15 experts and the client attending, which was incredibly interesting to see how my supervisor handled that. I've also been lucky enough to go to 2 trials in person as well, which is interesting, not just for the legal work, but also because it's a trip out of London, which is rare in the COVID times. And in terms of how I've actually found pupillage, I mean, as Emily said, I have thoroughly enjoyed it. And that's not putting words into my mouth. It's been
so far.
So far, yeah. I don't know what whether anything else new will be thrown at me, but it's been really good so far. I found it very supportive. There's been a strong emphasis on feedback, and sort of to touch on feedback a little bit because it's quite structured, which has been really useful to know. As soon as I got the offer letter back in May 2020, it was made very clear that tenancy decisions are based on you. There's no competition between myself and Chiara, the other pupil. It's all based on whether you meet the tenancy criteria. And on day 1, when we started, we were told what those criteria are, which is intellectual ability, expressive ability, interpersonal skills, commitment, drive, and efficiency, and interest in 1 or more areas of law. That's much less abstract as you go through because you get 2 feedback sessions in every seat. this gives you a rundown of the work you've done so far, whether you're meeting those criteria, how you can improve. So your half-time seat is really all about, you've done X well, but in your next 5 weeks, do Y, and this will get you to that stage. And at the end of each seat, you're very clearly told what grade you're at and how you've done. And to be honest, as well as just enjoying being in, the feedback's been one of the sort of most rewarding parts of the pupillage process, because you're doing work and you always find out how it's gone. And some of my initial bits of work were understandably far poorer than the ones I'm producing now. And the reason that I've improved is because I've had pretty hands-on and very helpful feedback from my supervisors. In addition to those structured feedback sessions, naturally, because you're working with people, there's ad hoc conversations as you go on. I've been asked about my life outside of Chambers, which thankfully I've been able to keep up with. Again, because there's a very good 9 to 6 rule, which means you don't work after 6 p.m. And it's been pretty rigidly adhered to. I remember on my first day, I stayed behind for 15 minutes to say goodbye to my supervisor, which he appreciated, but said, you know, keep going as start as you mean to go on, Chris. You should have gone 15 minutes ago. And all throughout, I found that I've been really supportive of making sure that I have a life, that I'm keeping up with the work and I'm not being swamped. And yeah, so far, as I say, I've enjoyed it. I hope that continues for the rest of Pupillage. But I've certainly not been swamped and it's been a good time.
Good. Nyasha, do we have you? Are you back with us? Well, you've moved
I hope so. Are you able to hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Fantastic.
Great. So maybe tell us a little bit about how you got to the bar and what stage you're at and what it was like being a pupil.
Brilliant. So taking each one of those in turn, I took an indirect route to the bar. I did the BPTC in my late 20s after having spent the first half of my 20s in part kind of working out what I wanted to do with my life, experimenting with a couple of different jobs. I had a period in Brazil, a period in Argentina working for NGOs. I then spent some time as a civil servant back in the UK and actually did a master's in public policy rather than, I think, the more conventional route, which is to do an LLM. But I realized that I wanted to be more closely working with the types of people that we get the opportunity to work at here at 39 Essex, and that I wanted to be doing kind of real life work with clients. So I then ended up doing a BPTC part-time in my late 20s and applied for pupillage. It took me 2 rounds to apply for pupillage. So for any of those who are kind of worried because they've been knocked back or rejected, the only advice I would give you is believe in yourself and listen to what happens in the interviews, ascertain what it is they're worried about, and then plug any holes that they kind of identify for you in your background. And I mean, for me, that was showing a commitment to the law beyond my understanding of kind of government and the public sector in general. So I did pupillage last year alongside 2 other pupils, that was Eleanor and Jake. And over the course of pupillage, I was doing the same kind of 4 rotations as Chris has been doing. So that begins with you do civil, and I did commercial in my first 6, and then you then move on into your second 6. And in the course of your second 6, you start going to court, which is great fun. And rather than kind of releasing you into the wild of the small claims court, Chambers has done a really good job of making sure that those who are a couple of years further along in their career are able to kind of provide you with some of the nuts and bolts of how to litigate a small claim, the types of briefs that you'll get, the things that are missing in the briefs that you'll get, how to deal with connection troubles, as we've seen earlier today, if you are in an online or virtual court, where to stand if you're in court in person, what to do if your client doesn't show up and you need to run into the toilets and call someone and say, what on earth do I do? Or if something unusual happens and it has cost consequences and you haven't necessarily memorized the entire of the civil procedure rules and so need a little bit of support from others in Chambers. So what happened prior to us going into court was that a lot of support was provided for us to kind of manage all of the things that might arise. And then in the second part of your Pupillage then, you balance doing work for supervisors in the 2 practice areas that you haven't yet joined with 2 or 3 different claims a week. And that really gives you an opportunity of understanding what it's like juggling your caseload at the bar, what it's like doing kind of some longer term in-depth work, like the type of work that your supervisors will set you and that ultimately you'll be led on in chambers, with some of the other hearings that you'll be having, which often you'll get briefs for 2 or 3 days before they happen, and then kind of you'll move on after they're done. So the second 6 is really, really great fun, and it gives you an opportunity to start to put into practice all of the things that you learn during your first 6 months in chambers. Lindsay, I think you had a third area that I might not have covered, so sorry about that.
No, I think you did a very good job. Thank you very much. You all 3 of you have stayed on as tenants. Jake's not with us at the moment because he's a judicial assistant in the for the Supreme Court. I don't suppose, I mean, one of the questions that people might have is what it's like in COVID. You haven't known anything other than it being in COVID, but you were in chambers most of the time. There were quite a lot of people around. You know, anything that you would say about the sort of COVID experience?
Yeah, so obviously it was quite unusual to be spending pupillage in chambers whilst lots of kind of other people were working from home. I am so glad that we had the opportunity to be in and that the social distancing measures were put in place, because chambers kind of socially and intellectually and from a kind of work perspective is a really important place to be and is a really important place to spend your time. Not least because on your corridor where you're working, there are often 3 or 4 people with just immense depth of expertise that you can call on and go and speak to, whose doors are often not literally, but always metaphorically open for any questions that you might have. And so the experience of doing kind of pupillage and now tenancy in chambers has not been one of isolation, even if there has been some kind of social distancing. It's been one of meeting a lot of senior members and having the opportunity to learn how to practice well as a barrister through interaction with those other members of chambers. The big changes, although I can't be an authority on this because I started during COVID, relate, I think, mainly to the extent that you spend more time running kind of hearings from either your home or from the 5th floor offices, the 5th floor meeting rooms, which, as Lindsay describes it, are an amazing facility, or from your chambers rooms. And with that comes all of the complexities of either dealing with your own technology issues or those of clients who sometimes are digitally excluded, sometimes might be relying on family members to help them getting online, with courts that are also having to deal with the digital transition. And it really is a period where there is a huge sea change in how the law operates. And it's really exciting to be in a place which is being very supportive about managing that transition. That said, it doesn't mean that I'm entirely off trains. I still do have to go to in-person hearings. Those have generally been in the southeast, although I know that other members of chambers practice from all the way around the UK. And so at the minute, I now have a really nice balance between some virtual hearings and then some hearings which happen in person. Brilliant. And that includes actually the infected blood inquiry, which I'm currently on, which is obviously an ongoing in-person public inquiry, which is all being held by the Strand.
Great. Okay. Chris, did you have anything else you wanted to say about being a pupil now? Or can we move on to the next one, which is life as a junior member at 39?
I mean, the only other thing I'd add is being a pupil now, again, I've not known anything different, is that starting in September last year, as sort of restrictions eased and whatnot, I've been pleased that there's still been quite a social environment around chambers. So from drinks on a Friday to social events on Fridays and things like that. We've been able to meet people, which is something that I was maybe worried about. I haven't been stuck in a room alone. And I've had the opportunity to chat to people in a social as well as a work environment that I was worried might not
Never
occur.
cheese or wine in May. Never cheese.
No,
Never.
none of that.
We've been very COVID compliant.
Yeah, alcohol certainly seen me through COVID. So I'm going to move on, and I'm going to ask Ruth, and I'm going to call on Ruth and David. And it is Ruth and David, isn't it? Yeah. And that you were both pupils at 39, not in the COVID era, and are now junior members. And so I'm not sure how you split it up. One of the things that I'd be quite interested if you could include in it is the kind of training program that you had as a pupil and ongoing into sort of being a junior member, and also, as with the others, what your route to the bar was, because I think it's always very interesting for people who are thinking about coming to the bar now. Why did other people go, and what were their experiences? So I'm not sure who's going to kick it off. I'll just let you go.
I'm happy to go first. Thanks, Lindsay. So my route to the bar, I grew up in London on a council estate. I went to university, then became a banker. I'd done PPE and an MPhil in economics. And because I was a glutton for punishment, decided I'd study law part-time because it would fill in what I'd missed out on during my previous studies. And obviously I had absolutely no social life and no friends. Just wanted to spend all my time studying, even though I had a job. What I found was that I thought law was probably a better long-term career for me because of the variety of clients. I didn't really get the variety of clients when I was doing FX and interest rate derivatives. They tended to all be companies or financial institutions, and they only wanted one thing, which was either to make more money or not to lose money. So the variety that law offered seemed appealing. So I started doing minis in around about 2013, I guess. It was quite a shock at first. I thought, oh gosh, this looks much more boring than I expected based on Kavanagh QC and things I'd watched on telly. But actually it was the minis that really cemented for me what I wanted to do in law, which was to do a mixed commercial and public law practice. And it was seeing people do that in practice at various chambers, not including 39, sadly, but that made me realise it would be a better career. So then came to the bar, and as with Nyasha, I took 2 rounds of pupillage applications to get it, and I'd certainly not say to anyone that they should give up after 1 or even after 2, and it is worth keep going. But the reason that you may well find you have to keep going is just because it is a good job and everyone wants to do it. So that's why. In terms of what happened after I'd finished pupillage, Nyasha and Chris have both mentioned already about the help you get from senior members in chambers, or even people who are just 1 or 2 years ahead, who obviously have plenty of experience to be able to offer you. That started straight away during second six for me when the 2 pupils from the previous year gave us a very, very helpful meeting where they went through all the kind of work we might be doing in the county court during second six. And it really continued seamlessly, almost, if you like, straight after second six. Although obviously it feels a little bit like you've been thrown in a deep end, everyone's door's still open. And so I spent my first 3 months, certainly, if not first 3-4 years, constantly badgering people, asking them, what do I do with this case and how does it work, and so on. The kind of work I did, in common, I think, with most people in chambers, you do a good mix of county court work where you get a lot of advocacy experience. I had a quick look back at my cases from my very first month in practice, and I saw that it included a mix of going to the Old Bailey to take notes on the criminal trial, which wasn't something I expected to be doing, but there was a civil liability angle on that. In the same month, I was also then down to Bournemouth County Court to argue for a motor driver who had his insurance policy declined, which was successful. It was one of my early wins, and it was nice to get one under the belt early on. And I also started working on a big fraud trial with 2 other members in chambers, where the defendants, or there was a number of defendants, but they were all governors of a school in Brent. So the variety of work that I'd hoped to get out of moving to the bar certainly came true for me. At the same time, I was able to say from an early stage what kind of work I was most interested in, and I expressed my interest in doing commercial and construction and public law cases. And over the 5 years I've now been practicing in Chambers, that's where I've ended up. So I do a fair bit of construction work. I also do general commercial work, and I'm also instructed in the Grenfell inquiry. And then I also do some regulatory work, which acts as quite a nice bridge between commercial and public. And that's, in my experience, been something that's been very easy for me to express a preference and then be guided towards that. There's the work there for juniors, and if you want to do it, then you just say you want to do it and you get on and do it. So I found it quite an easy transition between pupillage and becoming a junior tenant, and I think that's really been facilitated and aided by the fact that the culture in Chambers is so supportive. I think we genuinely are one of the friendliest chambers, if you like, and Chris's experience hopefully is replicated for all of our pupils in terms of being able to join in with social events and so on, and also getting guidance from more senior members where you need it. The other thing I'd just add in terms of the experience of a junior member is that there's a lot of opportunity to do secondments and the like. So during my second year of practice, I was seconded actually out to Singapore with Clifford Chance. I'd also spent 3 months at the start of that year with the FCA and also some time with the Financial Ombudsman. And I know other members of Chambers spent time seconded to, for example, other solicitors' firms, and also regulatory bodies such as the Office of Students, local authorities in their planning departments, and so on. So that's another string in terms of the work you get as a junior member, which is really helpful in terms of, one, building up experience in areas of law which are potentially quite frightening to start with, and also getting to see inside a client's offices and understand what a client wants when they go to counsel, rather than not having any idea if you haven't worked in one of those environments otherwise. And I think that's all I've got to say for now. So I'll hand over to Reeve.
I was going to jump in there, David, and say that's really helpful because you've answered one of the questions that somebody's asked, which was, how much leeway do you have to choose your practice area when you become a new tenant? So in the first couple of years, we encourage you to and expect you to do a lot of advocacy work. After that, after that sort of first 1-2 years, you move into whichever practice areas you would really like to be doing. And one of the things about 39, and this would be very different, so if some of you out there know that the only thing you ever want to do is intellectual property work, then you need to go and find a set that does intellectual property work and only intellectual property work probably, or has it, what we at 39 do is we have a very, very mixed practice area. So it's possible to, whilst you're going through being a pupil, experience all of that. And then, so if you hadn't, thought that, oh, actually, clinical negligence or construction law might be the thing for you, you get an opportunity to see that. It also means that our tenants, all of our tenants, junior and senior tenants, often have very mixed practices. So they don't just do one practice area. They don't just do, clinical negligence or just do personal injury or just do construction, or just do European law. They do a much broader mix of things. And that's one of the things that's possible at 39 and other sets where there is a much broader practice area. And we will be coming on to practice areas in a bit. I know that's one of the questions that's out there, but we will be coming on to that in a bit. And we do sit down with tenants and all the way through and talk about what it is that they want to be doing and how they can be doing more of it, and if they want to diversify, or how what's going to go with what. So thanks very much, David. That was very interesting. The other thing that brought up was that we also have 2 offices. Well, we have 3 other offices other than our London chambers. We have one in Manchester, which is pretty small, and we have one in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia, which is pretty small, and we have a pretty big one in Singapore. And so when we were able to travel, I was doing lots of traveling around all of those different chambers that we have. But they're all very connected, and actually we've become more connected through Zoom. There's lots of silver linings in COVID. Anyway, I've talked too much. Ruth.
That's great. Thanks, Lindsay. So in terms of a background, I'm similar to other people on the call. So I didn't come straight to the bar or come straight out of the womb knowing I wanted to be a barrister. I had a slightly longer route to get there. So I did my law degree in Dublin in Trinity College. That did then mean to qualify to do the English bar, I did have to sit land law just by itself, English land law. So I don't really do any land law now, but thankfully I do have it. In terms of a career then after university, I worked in a technology company, and I also worked at the Law Commission in England and Wales before coming to the bar. So certainly not a straightforward route to becoming a barrister. David's gone through there really helpfully what the work is like at the beginning, and I'd agree. You're encouraged certainly to develop areas of practice that you're interested in, and that's one of the questions we've got is, you know, how much control do you have over the areas of practice you work in? You certainly have some control in terms of the development, but again, at the beginning, you're encouraged to do a wide variety, which I certainly found really interesting and appealing in terms of chambers. Something that I have sympathy for everyone who's listening is, you know, it's really hard when you're setting out on this journey of applying for pupillage, because you want to get a really good set, of course, but you also want to know that when you get there, you're going to be happy and that the set is going to fit in the kind of environment you want to work in. And that was certainly really important for me. So I wanted to go to a set that was, you know, friendly, where there was this open door policy, if even now it's only virtual, and I've certainly found that to be the case. And in terms of an insight into that, I think there's two ways you see that. The first is that, of course, Hannah, one of my clerks, is on here. We have frequent phone calls and emails, so we're in very frequent contact during the week. That's a really important connection for chambers, to have that relationship with your clerks. But in a broader sense, you also have practice management meetings. And I found certainly as a junior tenant, you have them, you know, periodically throughout the year as you start off. And they're really important for having that bit of control in terms of saying, I work with the solicitor, I'm really interested in doing more of that work, how can I develop it out? I really want to work in this area of law, how can I work on that? And of course, your clerks, your practice managers are going to have a huge amount of insight into that. I remember one hearing early on where Hannah went with me, and she was talking to a court usher who, it was her first day and she didn't know what a clerk was, and Hannah said with a sense of gravitas, which I always quote to people, I'm kind of like a football manager. And I think that's a really good description of a clerk that I quote Hannah on to loads of people now. But I think it shows the importance of that close relationship you have with your clerks. And again, that's important, I think, when you're choosing whatever set you go to, that atmosphere and the relationship you'll have with them. The second aspect of it, and we've heard a lot, so Chris said it, you're not in competition with your co-pupils. Certainly having come through pupillage, that is not the case in chambers. If anything, you're encouraged to be friends with them. You obviously don't pretend to be friends with someone just to get brownie points as a pupil, but I'm still really good friends with my two co-pupils who also got taken on during COVID. We'd have weekly calls basically to talk about our cases, and really good friends. And that support network is hugely important, if not only for the fact that you will have to ask questions of people. So, you know, we've heard from the Asha about the panicked call from the toilet when you're having to make cost submissions you haven't heard of before. I have certainly made such phone calls in my junior years in the county court. And moving on, when you start to get, you know, higher value cases or cases you're worried about, there will be the first time you'll do a case and you won't have done something very similar to that case before. And you will have to ask people, and you'll have to feel like you're able to, you know, if it's a COVID world, email someone or telephone someone. And that isn't always as easy as walking by someone's open door, which is effectively an invitation to ask the question. But I've always felt during COVID that I've been able to talk to people. David Sawtell, who's going to join the call later, he very generously gave a couple of weeks ago about 35 minutes of his time for an unsolicited phone call on a CPR rule that I just couldn't figure out. And he generously said he didn't know the answer either, but we were able to reason through it together. And I think those kind of examples show how important it is to be somewhere that's friendly, because when you're starting off, you want to be able to sense check a question and make sure you've got the right answer. So Lindsay, that's a kind of a chat about the culture side of things and what life is like as a junior tenant in terms of knocking on people's doors and being an irritation, asking questions.
Yeah, and I think you and David have covered sort of the kind of work that you're doing, but maybe you could tell us, I mean, it's early in the year, but what have you, you know, in a typical week, what would you be doing now? And just tell us what level of how many years you've been practicing for since you did pupillage.
Great, so I'm slightly broken up in terms of my time. So I was called in 2017. This is a memory test now, not least of 2020 and 2021, which merged into one terrible year. So I was called in 2017. I did my pupillage and then went to the Supreme Court like Jake for a year as a JA. And then I've come back, and I think it's been 3 years, maybe. I really have to add it up again because these lost COVID years in the middle. But it's been a really diverse practice in between, which is good. So I'm off to Cardiff tomorrow in person for a hearing, working on a case that involves fraud. Effectively, one of my more interesting cases at the moment is a dispute involving a football club. They picked me, who knows, because I'm not a football fan, but I do now follow this club in their journey through various matches. So I might become a football fan because of this case. But
who knew? Who knew that would happen? Excellent. So is there quite a lot happening in person?
It's starting to come a little bit more in person. I'd agree with Nyasha. I think it's 50-50 at the moment. A lot of hearings, just because of certainty with witnesses and everything, are still going ahead remotely. So you don't get that, someone doesn't get a positive COVID test on the day of the trial and derail everything. But for certain cases like tomorrow, it is just, I think, better that everyone's there in person. One of the witnesses is a little not as good in technology as well, so it'll certainly be easier just to have their evidence in person, I think.
Well, good luck on the trip to Cardiff.
Thank you.
Enjoy. Enjoy. Okay, thank you both very much. I'm going to move swiftly on. So Sheraton and Hannah, you're going to talk to us about how we manage the second six and early years. Can you give us a little bit of an introduction to yourself, how long you've been here for at 39, and what it is that you do at 39?
Yeah,
that would be really helpful. Thanks.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name's Sheraton Dole. I'm one of the senior practice managers in the public law team. I've actually been in Chambers for a whopping 21 years. And been working, in the public law team the whole time. I joined in 2000 as what would have been an assistant, a lot smaller Chambers then, probably was about 50 of us at that point, 50 members, and was covering sort of the core practice areas as it was at the time, which again would have included the public law side of things. I was only at another set previously coming to 39, so I started clerking when I was 18 and only been at one other set since coming to 39, because I've stayed here for such a long time. So I can obviously vouch for the fact that it is a jolly nice place to work. Hannah is co-presenting with me. She's one of the practice managers in the civil liability group, and Hannah's been with us for 5 years now, and she will certainly be a very integral part of looking after the pupils from the outset. As Lindsay said, we, from the agenda, will be covering what you can expect on the second six, and also once you've completed your successful pupillage, what to expect from those early years. And Hannah's going to cover the second six side of things. So I'll hand over to Hannah now.
Brilliant, and thanks ever so much, Sheraton. So yeah, I've been here 5 coming up 6 years, which is pretty scary. I had a slightly odd route to the bar in some ways, being that I am not the bar, to becoming a clerk, being that I didn't know what I wanted to do. I spent 6 months at uni. I didn't like doing that. I then ended up spending 6 months teaching sailing in Greece before, through kind of luck more than judgment, ending up as a clerk at one of the other planning sets. I enjoyed that for 3 years, and then came to 39, first off in the planning team before later moving across to the civil liability group, which I've been in for coming up 4.5 years now, which is frankly quite scary, but something I really enjoy. Civil liability includes, as sort of has been mentioned previously, personal injury, clinical negligence, as well as things such as sort of property damage and professional negligence, and basically anything that doesn't fit into some of the other teams, and costs and things like that. So in terms of pupillage, something that I think Chambers does really well and is reasonably rare in sort of your more in the bigger sets, is that we get all of the pupils in their second six to actually practice. And that means you're able to go to court, normally sort of once or twice a week, seeing cases and undertaking advocacy in your own right. Typically, these cases will be small claims, so road traffic accidents, slips and trips, maybe somebody falling over a banana in a supermarket is quite standard, but really nice small cases that give you exposure to a wide range of judges, as well as meeting ushers. Ruth sort of mentioned how important getting a good relationship with the court staff and ushers are. There's nothing like being able to speak to the usher to find out when and where your case is going to be heard. And yeah, I definitely think if you're nice to ushers, you can certainly have an awful lot better a day than if you're not. That's always one of my tips and to second six and pupils. Later on in the second six, pupils also look to do some small, perhaps contract disputes sort of within the C&C team, or a small kind of enforcement planning case perhaps, or maybe sort of a public law, court of protection / educational law matter. Obviously, as and when is the right time and the pupil and their supervisor feels confident. The cases that pupils do in the second six typically take place in the county court, and we try to keep you within the sort of M25 London region, just so it's nice and local for you and not too much travelling. Although at present, as has been mentioned, probably 50 to 60% of the time, it will be heard remotely. And it's sort of a really interesting juxtaposition between the two different mediums of a hearing, being in person or remotely. And yeah, getting into court gives you great exposure and the ability to interact with the judges, and importantly, your clients and opposition. Quite typically, normally pupils from other sets of chambers, which again gives you a really nice opportunity to sort of chat and get to know others, be that remotely or in person. And then, yeah, over the 6 months, pupils typically do in the region of 20 to 30 cases. It's sort of 2 per week max. And I liaise with the pupil supervisors quite closely to ensure that the pupils have sufficient time to be doing other work. And we can sort of block out time in your diary if you've got something important going on. We just really make sure that you've got plenty of time to prepare and know what you're doing. And what's best of all, the fees you're paid, you get to keep over and above your Pupillage award, which is always very nice. And this may sound quite a daunting prospect, but as has been vaguely mentioned previously, we run a really detailed second six training schedule, or pre-second six training schedule, that I'm just starting to prepare for this year for Chris and Chiara, which is quite exciting. This is basically where we provide mock trials, training sessions, and details on what you need to know and the likely things that could catch you out. We'll ensure that your pupil supervisor and other junior tenants have really helped you, so you're feeling really, really confident for your first case. In second six, it's not all just hard work though. As has been mentioned previously, we're a really social set and we organise pupil and clerk events. This year we went to Bounce for the evening, which is really, really lovely. And we had it as a nice mixed event with this year's pupils and last year's pupils due to COVID. So yeah, in my opinion, and I hope Sheraton would agree, the key to effective pupillage and, frankly, junior tenancy is really ensuring good communication with your practice team. We're here to help and support you, and we frankly really, really want you to succeed in practice. Over to Sheraton for a bit more about the early years.
Thanks, Hannah. Okay, so now moving on to the early years, you've been taken on to a tenant in Chambers. Yay, well done you. Then as before in your time at Pupillage, what's really important is that the mentoring and support will continue throughout. You'll have a buddy in Chambers who will be a junior tenant who has very recently been through the early year stage as well, which you're now encountering, so can offer lots of guidance and reassurance if that's what's needed. You will continue to be instructed on the type of matters Hannah discussed a moment ago. But now as a tenant, what's great is that you will have a much wider range of opportunities to become involved in the breadth of practice areas that we cover here at 39. Sort of different examples of that I can offer to you. Some of that's already been covered earlier, but as David was saying earlier, you know, junior tenants will often be called upon to consider taking on many secondments, and that will be in a range of different areas with sort of local authorities, which will cover sort of public, commercial, planning issues. Ordinarily, you would be on the ground with them in their offices, but obviously at the moment, this is taking place still virtually. We also have, as David touched on before, the Financial Ombudsman Service and other regulators that we're called upon very regularly to assist them. Ofgem, the Electoral Commission, Bank of England, Office of Students are some of them, to name a few. And as David mentioned as well, you know, we've had opportunities to go overseas as well, having rolling secondments in Singapore with law firms out there. So these opportunities are really absolutely vital and brilliant, you know, for the junior bar. You get to know the clients, you get to know how the sector works, you get to gather knowledge on a particular area of law that you're sitting in. And of course, you start to develop the relationship with the clients as well, which you can then build on and progress into transferring into instructions and work. Another highlight of the early years and coming to 39 is getting to work with some of the most preeminent silks and senior juniors in Chambers, which means you get exposure to work with them on their cases, which, you know, primarily most of the time will be very high profile, very interesting and very important cases. Examples of this, and both Ruth and David have touched on this before, is that we have a lot of public inquiry work currently in Chambers, having counsel to inquiry on both the Grenfell Tower and also the infected blood inquiry. And we have large teams in Chambers that are looking after that. We also, of course, unfortunately, have the COVID inquiry on the horizon, which again will offer plenty of opportunities across the board in Chambers. And we have actually already secured several lead counsel roles for central government departments. We also have 24 members on the government's legal department panel, which is the Attorney General's panel. You can't apply to actually get on the C panel until you're at least 3 years call, but in the early years, you can join a scheme, which is called the Junior Scheme. Once you're on that scheme, the members of Chambers who are part of the GLD panel, whether it be the Silks or A, B or C panels, who can be working on particular cases for central government, can then ask for a junior in Chambers to come and assist them to get involved into that. Or GLD will call the clerks directly and ask if we've got somebody on that scheme who's able to help with a particular disclosure matter or draft pleadings in a range of different areas. So again, that's another great opportunity. And you can also get opportunities to work with other barristers outside of Chambers, which, you know, that's not a negative either. That's a great opportunity for other people to learn more about what you're doing. As what's been touched on previously as well, you know, we will have practice review meetings with you, ideally every 6 months, but, you know, it's not going to be limited to that. If you've got concerns or issues you want to raise, we'd be more than happy to chat with you about that. You know, particular areas you want to develop, general aspirations, and just sort of anything we can help you with. Because communication, as Hannah has already touched on, is absolutely key between all of us to take you forward in your career at the bar. Again, we've touched on how social we can all be in Chambers, but if we was living in the normal sense of the world, there would be lots of social business development opportunities for you. We're starting to see some more in-person events take place, but that's still going to take some time. In a pre-COVID world, we would ordinarily host lots of different seminars and events in Chambers, and the juniors are actively encouraged to attend the talks and then follow on with the drinks, where you could get the chance to mingle with clients and members. But obviously in the current climate, we've reverted to a massive, hugely successful online webinar program where juniors are included to either speak or give assistance with writing the papers. And they're then given credit to the talks, which gives you something to add to your Chambers online website profile. Again, it's been touched on that, you know, Chambers culture really is to be, you know, as social as possible. We're a very big set, so it's always been really important to make sure that we've got social events internally. In term time pre-COVID, you would have members of Chambers every other Friday who would pay for lunch for everybody, and it would just be a time for everybody to catch up and talk about the cases they're doing and just sort of information sharing and just generally just see how everybody's doing really. And of course we would have had drinks on a Friday, whether it was in the clerk's room space pre-COVID, whether it was term time or not, basically every Friday. So that was another opportunity for everybody to catch up. I don't think there's much more that we could touch on really at this stage, but it's really just to assure you that we really do understand and appreciate how daunting the pupillage experience can be for some. But as you've seen, you know, with previous experiences of pupils here, we really are here and are excellent at supporting you at all different levels. Unfortunately, I won't be able to stay on for the whole of the session today, but by all means, if anybody's got separate questions that they would like to address with me, be more than happy to, you know, speak to anybody about anything that I've not covered today that would be of interest to them.
Brilliant. Thank you both very much. Really, really helpful. And before I go on, I'm just going to sort of sweep up a few of the questions. So there's been quite a lot of questions about the interviews and how you prepare and that kind of thing. And that will get dealt with, I think, when we get to the session on the interviews. Somebody's asked about what pupil, do we take pupils every year? Pretty much, yes. There's no set thing, but certainly as far as I know, I've been here for 4 years now. We've taken pupils every year bar one, and we did offer pupillage those years, but unfortunately the people we offered to went somewhere else. So we have offered pupillage most years. How many do we take? Usually between 2 or 3 pupils every year. What kind of seats can you choose what seats you do? No, you do one. We have 4 practice areas and you do a seat in each of those 4 practice areas. So that is pretty set. That is one of the things that's pretty set. Would we be interested in you if you already knew what area you wanted to practice in? Yes, we would, and have examples of that. And so it's good to come and experience other things during your pupillage. But if you are pretty sure that because of a career beforehand or something else, that there is one area that what you want to be doing is commercial law or construction law or whatever it might be, then yes, we it do apply. And is it a waste of time to apply if you have got a 2-1? No, please do apply. Is mini pupillage a prerequisite? No, it's not. Are there any musts for extracurricular activities? No, there might be some things we wouldn't want you to do, but those would probably be illegal. But otherwise, there's no musts. And I think that everything else will probably get covered, but we'll do another sweep up towards the end. There's quite a lot on Singapore office, Manchester office, ADR. I'll come back to that. But right now, I'm going to go to Kelly and Rachel, who are going to talk about our different practice areas and 39 ethos. That sounds very grand, but I'm sure you'll do a very good job. Kelly and Rachel, can you just tell us what your route to the bar was and a little bit about yourselves, please?
Sure. Rachel, do you want to go first?
I was just about to ask if you wanted to go first.
We're too polite. I think it has to be you.
So polite.
I'm afraid I'm on my phone because my aged laptop crashed and died as I joined this. So I hope I'm audible. Like some of the other people who've been already, I took a kind of slightly indirect route to the bar. So I studied English rather than law, did a master's, nearly did a PhD, decided I didn't want to do that for not very creditable reasons. Worked for a bit at the Oxford University Press as a research assistant for the Oxford English Dictionary, and then did the law conversion, worked part-time still through that, worked part-time through the bar course, which made me, I think, the only person in the stupid enough to be studying in London and commuting to Oxford for work. I think basically the first and last hour of every day I worked for free because that was paying for the bus there and back. I've been in Chambers for 4 or 5 years. I'm between David Hopkins and Ruth in terms of how long I've been here. So, and I have a most.
And you did your pupillage here, didn't you?
The chair in 2016, 2017, which if I was good at mental maths would mean I could work out how many years I've been practicing. But Kelly?
Sure. So I'm state school educated, went to the LSE for my undergrad where I did law, then went to Cambridge to do a master's. I thought at that time that I really, really wanted to be a tax barrister. Thank goodness that didn't quite work out. But what I actually ended up doing was I trained at the European Commission and I was judicial assistant at the Court of Appeal. And then I went off to be a solicitor in a specialist tax and EU disputes practice for about 6 years. It was incredibly good experience and I was generally pretty happy doing it. But at heart, I think I really just wanted to be at the bar. So I moved over to 39 just over 7 years ago now. I should say that in my first 6 months of being here, my clerk introduced me as having been here for 2 years, which I'm not quite sure quite how bad my first 6 months was, but there we are. So I've been here since, and now my practice is, for somebody who does tax, quite diverse. I do still do quite a lot of tax. I do EU law and I also do commercial. So an unconventional route, I think. So shall we pick up our points around
Thanks.
practice areas and ethos. Shall I go first then on the practice areas? And Rachel, please do jump in if there's anything that you'd like to say. So we are ranked in 19 areas, I think, in the directories, and our individuals are ranked in even more. And I think that really just shows the breadth of our experience as a set. Lindsay's already referred to our foreign offices in Malaysia and Singapore. What I would just say about those is we have a physical presence there with our own staff, members who work in and are based in the region, and some of our members are exclusively in that region. But we do have actually a really broad spread of international work as well. We've got plenty of people who do work in Dubai in the Middle East. We've got plenty of work in disputes in India in particular. There are a number of us who are Irish qualified, obviously partly because of Brexit. And of course, we have some members who work in the Caribbean jurisdictions as well. So pretty broad ranging work outside of the UK. In terms of our core areas, they are represented internally by 4 practice groups. So we've got our planning, environmental and property group, our public law group, which of course includes the mental capacity work, education, procurement, JR of all varieties, including commercial JR, and our inquiry work, which you've already heard about. Our civil liability group, which includes some very interesting work around sports law, and our commercial and construction group, which covers a whole range of disputes, but that also includes arbitration and mediation, and of course that's both domestic and international arbitration. What I would say is that being a member of one group doesn't mean that you don't get work from the others. So as it happens, I'm clerked by the commercial and construction team, but I have certainly worked with the clerking teams of all of the other practice areas. And in my particular areas of practice, there are often crossovers between those subject matters and mine. So for example, sometimes tax issues come up in the context of planning law or environmental law. And the same can be said for the other areas as well. So we do function as having, sort of 4 separate practice groups, but there is plenty of working across those groups, and we all get to know each other pretty well. Finally, I would just add that from my perspective, at least, I think I've been here long enough, and I'm probably a bit, well, I'm just going to say a little bit longer in the tooth than some people here, and so perhaps a little bit less patient. But I think 39 is a really great place to work. I've worked in a few places already in my time, and for me, one of the really important things is that our clerking teams are really excellent. I think they're technically very good at their jobs, but also I find that I get on really well with them, and those relationships with your clerks, I think, are a really key part of practice. So for me, that's a really important part of 39. Our staff outside of the clerking teams are all incredibly helpful, and I would echo what's been said already about fellow members of Chambers and how much doors are open and people are happy to chat. In fact, I'm feeling slightly wistful because Colin's my next door neighbour in Chambers, and I haven't seen Colin for a little while. But in any case, it's a very friendly, lovely place, and I think that goes to both our general social interaction, but also how effective we are at working together as well. Rachel, shall I let you pick up
just
your
before
points?
you do, Kelly, and there's a
Yeah.
question for you, which is, what was the underlying reason that made you switch over from the solicitor role to the bar? Was it the preference for the academic side of the law versus litigation client management, or was it some other reason?
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, it was a good question, right?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a great question. I think I had always intended to be a barrister. So I was called to the bar before I went off to become a solicitor, and I didn't get a pupillage in the area that I wanted to. So just to be upfront, I really, really just wanted to be a tax barrister and nothing else. Having worked as a solicitor in some really good quality work for a while, I wanted to do more of the advocacy. And I also realized that as I was becoming more senior as a solicitor, I'd have to do more of the management stuff. So, the sorts of things like, it's going to sound really dire, but making sure that files are open properly and making sure that the policies are complied with properly, and all of those things, which are perfectly good and sensible things to do, but they felt like they were quite far away from the actual law. And so I wanted really to be devoting most of my time to being a lawyer properly, advocacy where I could get it. I do some academic work, but actually my practice as a barrister is very practical and client focused. I try not to sound like an academic when I'm advising my clients, if I could put it that way. So I hope that answers the question.
I think there's one other question which sort of covers you, which is, do we do UK and international tax work? And my answer to that would be yes, we do. And you've sort of answered that as part of your question, but that if you wanted to be, if what you really wanted to do was tax work, 100% tax work, then there are specialist tax chambers.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, the rationale for me doing tax here is that it's part of my practice only. So I like to do other things. And actually quite a lot of the tax work that I do at 39 is something which comes out of a core dispute in another area where tax advice is needed as well. So if you want to have a 100% tax practice, I think you'd probably have more fun at one of the tax sets.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, Rachel.
Thank you. I'm talking about sort of Chambers ethos in general, which in some ways is going to be really easy and in some ways is quite difficult because everybody has already very kindly explained what a friendly and welcoming place it is, that we've got an open door policy, the extent to which we kind of rely on each other and indeed rely on the clerks. Somebody's asked a question in the group chat about if juniors are being allocated to inquiries, how do they balance their work? And the answer to that is with great patience and good grace from the clerking team, who roughly once a month certainly get me. I'm one of the juniors to the Grenfell Tower inquiry, and about once a month for the last 4 years I've turned up saying, please clear my diary. It is great chambers in that sense. I think we're quite a big set. There's a rough count from the website suggests about 155 barristers. We've also got some door tenants, academic associates, people at sort of varying levels of seniority, but everybody, from sort of second six junior tenants, second six people's right, junior tenants right up to, we've got Lord Dyson on my floor, and everybody is incredibly open and generous with their time and their experience. The first ever Court of Protection case I did, I spent, I think, about 3 hours on the phone to Katie Scott, who's sort of 10, 15 years cool, and she just walked me through pretty much everything I needed to know. She was just so incredibly gracious and kind, and I think fielded a call from me on a Good Friday, and I really will never forget everything I owe to her for that. And I think that's quite representative of what Chambers is like. Ruth said earlier, we've tried to keep it that way as much as possible during COVID. Obviously, COVID has been a challenge. Some people are now back in a bit, were before we once again had returned to the work from home directive. Courts are coming back in person, but it's not always clear. I was supposed to be in court in person tomorrow as well, also in Cardiff, Ruth, but for a JR. And that is now taking place remotely because my opponent has got COVID. So it is obviously, we're not immune to that, but we have tried to keep in touch with each other as much as possible. People call each other asking questions, people email. We've got all sorts of WhatsApp groups. There's a general Chambers social WhatsApp group, which is good to see what everyone's up to. There are sort of specialist niche WhatsApp groups. I'm in a baking Chambers group, which is the most supportive place I've ever found. And it's just a generally nice place to work. And I think that makes us better at our jobs. It means that you see links between the different types of work you do, the different types of work that other people are doing that otherwise you might lose if in more sort of specialist or siloized environment. I've forgotten what else I was supposed to be covering. There's been a few questions about policies of various sorts. So there was a question about Chambers' disability policy. I think somebody asked a question about maternity. Kelly and I are both sit on Chambers Equality and Diversity board. I think we're Equality and Diversity Officers is the technical job description, doing various things. In response to those questions, I suppose all I can really say is we have a full suite of policies, as you would expect in any 21st century workplace, the disability policy is that, of course, we welcome applications from disabled applicants or unilateral hires. The building itself is a really wonderful building in terms of accessibility. And as and when reasonable adjustments required, we will make those, because firstly, it's the law, and secondly, it's the obviously right thing to do. So please, if anyone listening to this, it has any concerns about that sort of thing, and please don't. And if it would help to get in touch to discuss, please feel free to do that. In terms
Rachel,
of
can I just jump in there and just say that on that question, there is another webinar happening. All Bar are running a webinar for people with a disability who want to be applying for pupillage. And from memory, I think that's Hannah, you might tell me if I'm wrong, but I think that's the 21st of January. So you might want to look at that, the All Bar, which is one of the joint groups within at the bar, which
speaking of,
so, well, then you should know what date it is. I think it's the 21st of January. We'll look it up and Hannah will let you know. Sorry to interrupt, Rachel. The other thing I'd say on maternity is that where it's now parental leave policy and open to both men and women, obviously, and we're very supportive of it. We are very proud of the numbers of women and men who've come back after having had children. And we have had pupils, people have babies in pupillage whilst being very junior members and all the way through, their careers. And so we're very keen on women coming up with some plan that makes it work for them or men. So parental leave is very much supported. Sorry to interrupt, Rachel.
No, not at all. And that really was what I was going to say, was because Chambers does have members who have taken all different routes to get here. Our members arrive in Chambers at different points in their lives and different points in their careers. And when to have start a family, if that's what you want to do, it is an intensely personal decision. And if it ends up that you starting a family during pupillage or during your first years of practice, so be it, and you'd have the full support of Chambers, and the policies are designed to reflect that. Other diversity sort of based questions off the top of my head, we do publish, as we're bound to, our diversity statistics. It is somewhere on the website, I think under the heading diversity. Worth bearing in mind that we categories where less than 10 individual respondents answer a question or in one group which would make people potentially identifiable don't get published. That's standard practice, but it's a fairly complete set of data. Come to 39, it's a great place. I applied here. I actually only applied here once, because although I did 2 rounds of applications, 39 rejected me from Mini in my first year of time. And so I thought there was no point applying for pupillage. And then in the second year, I applied for Mini, got a Mini and applied for pupillage. There is no requirement that you have to do a Mini here. It's a good experience. I found it helpful in the sense that everywhere says, oh, well, come to us, we're a friendly set, and everyone means something slightly different by that. I found it very helpful for getting a sort of feel of what friendly meant. And I think to me, it was that Chambers is friendly as a workplace in a kind of professional friendliness way, which is not always the case. Everywhere is professional, but that sort of warm feeling doesn't always suffuse every set. But it's also a very warm and friendly place. Outside of that, I've made great friends from Chambers, and I'm sure I'll continue to do so. So come here, it's great. Lindsay, is there anything, or Kelly, is there anything else I was supposed to be covering?
No, I think you've done a very good job, both of you. I don't know, did you want to say anything else, Kelly?
No, I can't think of anything else. I echo what Rachel says. It is genuinely a friendly, nice place, and I think people should come.
Right. If just follow up on a couple of things that were said and to answer a few of the questions. Does every pupil and tenant do court of protection work? No, you won't necessarily do it in pupillage, and you won't necessarily do it in tenancy. You wouldn't do it in tenancy unless you it was something that it was an area that you wanted to cover. Do we do a lot of work in Wales and other parts of England? Yes, we work in Wales, throughout England, everywhere in England. Haverfordwest is one of the places that people really, really hate to go to because it's very difficult to get there on public transport. But yes, we do have people that have gone. Has anyone here been to Haverfordwest? No. You know your clerk doesn't like you if you send you to Haverfordwest. And we also do work in Scotland. All the planning work we can do planning work in Scotland without being called to the Scottish bar. And we also do a lot of work internationally. I know there's been a lot of questions about our international offices and the international work we do, and I will come back to that later on, and the other questions that haven't been answered. But right now, I'd like to move straight away to what the 39 pupil supervisors are looking for from their pupils, and Colin and Emily. And Colin and Emily, can you please tell us what your route to the bar was at some point when you were talking to us? Thank you.
Yes, Emily has been very efficient and prepared some notes for us. We're going to be sharing them. But just to introduce us, we're both pupil supervisors. My route is slightly unusual to the bar. My school education finished in Germany. I then did my undergraduate degree in Reading, postgraduate in Oxford, and came to the bar through that route. I have an application folder retained this thick with individuals, firms, chambers who have said no at the first attempt. And if you take one thing away from this seminar, it is don't be discouraged by that. Certainly when I look at your applications, I won't hold it against you if you're applying for the second time. If anything, I think that shows that you are determined and that you have the requisite commitment to make it at the bar. In terms of the practice areas, I do public law, environmental law, and a variety of other things. Some of my cases at the moment focus on information law, and I also do some cases for international organizations in Munich and The Hague. In terms of what we look for in our pupils, I think I'd like to pick up initially on one of the points made by Rachel and Kelly, and that is the importance of diversity. It's never been more important for us at the bar that our makeup reflects society in general, and that we have barristers, pupils, pupil candidates who reflect society. Therefore, one strong recommendation is to be confident in yourself, be yourself when you apply, and know that we will look to make sure that you are given the best possible opportunity to succeed, and we will look to pick you up where you are and look to make sure that you have a route and that we manage to make that route as fair and as even as possible as you make your way through chambers. All that said, there are a couple of relatively easy wins that are worth pointing out. So 4 things that I'd like you to bear in mind when you start pupillage is it's quite easy to gain requisite brownie points if you are starting by being on time. Second one is if you're attending court, if you're attending a conference, generally a good idea to have a notebook ready, pen, and without being asked if possible, be ready to make such contribution as you can by assisting when you attend. Third aspect is in your interaction with others, with members of chambers, with clients, be polite, be courteous. And then fourth, and this gets back to where we started, be sufficiently confident to project and to be yourself in those situations. I think one of the questions we had from contributors is it a disadvantage or should we be discouraged from being bright-eyed and bushy-tailed? My view, not at all. If that is your character, if that is your makeup, if that is how you are approaching being a barrister, then those are part of the qualities that you bring to the professions, and the profession is all the richer for having you there with them. In terms of general wider expectations, one of the important things that we like to look for in our candidates is that they have a work-life balance. That means we will throw you out at 6 o'clock, and generally I will not be impressed by individuals who seek to work all weekend and seek to go the extra mile at the cost of their personal life and are at the cost of developing as a rounded person, which again is part of what makes this profession the strong profession it is. It's already been said that we have an absolute standard in terms of judging our pupils. We will look to you, we will look to your qualities, and we will see whether we think you have the requisite qualities to be an effective barrister. We will not be comparing you with your colleagues in that respect. And that is encouragement, should you need it, to consider those colleagues as allies and as potential support and advice sources along with others as you make your way through pupillage. One other thing to say, and it really, again, comes to the fundamentals that we expect of you. If you find in your particularly in your early weeks with us, that you have questions, that there are things that you find difficult to work out, and by all means ask soon. You will have heard earlier the description of Chambers as an open door policy environment. That is very much what we encourage. And one of the easiest ways of avoiding going down rabbit holes and getting stuck in your early times is to look at the friendly places around you and to ask the requisite questions. That's all from me. Now handing over to Emily.
Thank you, Colin. I was going to say about my route to bar, what I've realised absolutely every one of us has said my route to bar was a bit unusual, which only goes to show there is no usual route to bar. So I'm not going to say that. I'm going to say I did a history degree and I had no thought of doing law or let alone going to the bar. My first job was in public relations because I think what I like most of all is communicating. And I just hadn't realised that for me, communicating would best be achieved in this job. I was terrible at public relations and got sacked inside of 6 months. So that was the end of my first career. I spent about a year thinking a bit longer and harder about what to do, which led me to go to law school. Again, by the time I got to law school, because I'd worked for a couple of years, I knew that I wanted to go to the bar. And by the time I'd finished law school, I actually knew I wanted to practice in personal injury, which is what I do, and clinical negligence. So when I started to apply for pupillage, in fact, I applied and had a pupillage at 39. I didn't have to make more than one application. I got through at the first round, but I didn't get taken on. So I've done the pupillage thing of not getting tenancy at the end of pupillage. Circumstances were different. Now we don't expect to choose between pupils. If we take on pupils and you reach our benchmark, we keep you as tenants. That's something that's changed since my time. So I worked elsewhere for some years and came back to 39 when I was about 16 years cool. So I suppose from that, one part of the story that everybody shares, which is one of the things we think is important to help you learn as pupils, is tenacity is a great assistant in this career. Keep on keeping on. One of the questions we've been asked, which I also would pick up and answer at this stage, is what makes 39, what sets it apart? Why did you choose it? I mean, I chose 39. I always wanted to practice here. So was a bit of a blow not to get taken on, but enabled me to come back later on. I think the thing that makes 39 special, and you've heard it expressed in lots of different ways, is that we all support each other. Everybody who works at 39, from pupils, staff, tenants, judges, everybody who comes back here, we all work to help each other. I think it's very much a place where your success is my success. If I can help you rise, we all rise together. And you can see that in the way that people will help you when you're locked in the loo and don't know what to say in court, or will help you when For example, in the large scale inquiries, we have people leading inquiries, and then work filters all the way down through chambers. But that sort of generosity of spirit and that sort of embracing of other people's success and that commitment to help everybody with generosity of spirit professionally is, I think, the real hallmark of 39. It's certainly something that as supervisors we seek to provide to our pupils. And I can see Chris vigorously nodding. Well done, Chris. No, but I mean, that's something that we try really hard to give to you in your pupillage. It is a learning process. And as we've said lots of times before, the application process can seem arduous and can seem daunting, and it may take more than one go. But once you have a pupillage with us, it is our intention to invest in you all the way, and we want our pupils to become our tenants, and we want our pupils to succeed. They're not in competition with each other, and it is a place to learn. So we expect you to make mistakes, but to learn from them. We expect you to ask questions, ideally before you make those mistakes, because that's an even better way of learning. But we communicate all the way through. Chris has already mentioned the feedback. That's the best way to learn, learning by doing, having a go, doing active work that we share with you. So for example, this week, Chris is preparing for a conference that we have next week, and I'm going to prepare as well, and then we'll share our preparation. Then we'll have the conference, and then we'll discuss what happened afterwards. As an example, another example is he's just done a schedule in a case that we're working on. I've done the schedule, then we'll come together and talk about it. Much easier than a sort of lecture or a lesson. So yeah, tenacity, diligence, attention to detail. You cannot overemphasize the importance of attention to detail in this job. As barristers, our role is always to know more than anybody else about situations or about cases we're involved in. So I would say, for me, the most off-putting thing in an application form that I see is one that's been dashed off. If it's full of spelling mistakes or it's just not got much thought given to it. One of the questions about people asking what you want from a form, to me, that's more important than almost anything. Attention to detail, tenacity, client care. So often we find people, even if you've worked a lot before, which some pupils have, or if you've never worked at all, you've just come straight through the academic work route. One thing you really don't learn until pupillage is client care, client communication, working with different people. And of course, those people will be different in the 4 seats. So again, that's something you get a broad range of experiences in, but how to communicate. So in my area, with somebody who's been catastrophically injured or bereaved, or with an expert, with somebody who is the leading light in their field, but you want them to do something very particular, which is part of the court process, or to people that have got significant commercial experience but are involved in litigation. So client care is something that you will learn a lot of during your year in pupillage, and the ability to build and maintain relationships, professional relationships, both with solicitors or with clients, and also boundaries in those relationships. Those, I think, are the kind of most different skills that you won't have had on the academic route, because it's not until you get going in real life scenarios that is something that you learn. But our role is to teach in that year, teaching by doing, teaching by learning, and teaching by feedback. We also do in-house training with advocacy in particular, but advocacy, ethics, and various points of learning in the early years of practice, which will probably be we'll probably touch on a bit later. But in the second 6 we have, or in the run up to second 6, we have quite an intense additional program of how to practice, build, and how to do all those other roles. So we don't expect you to know those things, we expect to teach you. And we don't expect you to be perfect. And nor do we expect you to be completely perfect at the end of pupillage. So we have a mentoring scheme that runs through pupillage and on into the early years of practice, indeed can run for as long as you want, but to provide a specific route. So there's always somebody you can phone at midnight, as well as the open door policy. that we have. One of the great joys of pupils turning into tenants and staying in the same chambers, which is what happens to most of us, is that for those of us that have been supervisors for a long time, we have a cohort of people that have been our pupils and are now increasingly successful tenants, but still feel able to come back and ask questions from time to time. And indeed, you're asking about parental policy. One of the other joys is when your ex-pupils start to build their own families, and then you have grand-pupils, which is also a joy and something that we have a number of. So it's very much, as I say, sort of learning for life is what I would express our pupil system to be. I hope that kind of covers most of it. Colin, that's gone through our list. What else do you think we should say?
I've got two questions. So Colin, there's a question for you on the questions, which is, when Colin says be ready to assist when you attend, what does this look like?
Yes, and you can take a variety of forms. The most obvious one is that if you're sitting behind your pupil supervisor in court, in conference, it is a good idea to keep a note of things as they go along. It can on occasion involve, if you've read a particular case that you think is in point, or if you notice that something has gone awry in a hearing, it may be you that will be able to volunteer to assist to address the point. But generally, if you're there with a note, and if you're ready to contribute with specific tasks when asked, you will have done 9/10 of what is likely to arise during those occasions.
And Emily, we haven't actually touched on yet, and I think that might be, I don't quite know why, but I don't see that we're going to do it further forward, how we make the decision on going, from pupil to tenancy. So what happens as part of that. So maybe you could just take us through that very quickly.
Sure. So we have the 4 seats, and I think it's been asked before, but they're 4 seats. They're always the same. They're the 4 set seats of common law, environmental, commercial and public, and everybody sits in those 4 seats, and it's roughly 12 weeks in each. There are 2 formal feedback sessions in each one, so every piece of work is fed back as you go, but there are 2 formal sit-down sessions with a form that's filled out telling you where you are and where you're going in each seat. So by the time you finish, that's 8. We also have an assessed advocacy exercise, and we also have 2 pieces of work done anonymously for another member of Chambers that we call shadow panel work, but 2 written pieces of work that are then marked and are fed back in as well. So we have all of that, plus all the sort of general feedback we have. And then we have a formal sit-down process of the supervisors and the pupillage committee, generally in around June, because although the pupillage runs from September to September, Chambers start to make decisions at a relatively early stage, so that it gives the lead time over summer if people aren't taken on, or looking for 3rd, 6th, so on and so forth, to move on. Although I have to say that doesn't, as I say, we tend to keep people on. But we have an assessment process. So as you're going through, you will have a good idea of where you're going and how things are going. And we try to be constructive as well, in terms of if there's anything major that needs addressing. So it shouldn't come as a terrible surprise at the end of a seat to be told you weren't very good at something, because there's no point in that. And we sit down with all of those matters, and then we make a decision at that early June stage. If we don't keep people on, we then obviously they can stay for the rest of their pupillage, and we make great strides to help people find somewhere else to go. And in fact, of the relatively small number of people that haven't been taken on here, we haven't yet got to the end of that pupillage process without them having somewhere else actively to move on to. I'm sure I can be corrected if I'm wrong, but I don't think we have anybody who hasn't been taken on that wanted to stay isn't now practicing at the bar somewhere else. Is that enough of an answer?
Nobody's actually asked this question, which I'm quite surprised about, but the ratio in the last 5 years of pupillage to tenancy is 93%.
I was going to say I could add it up to you. It's very high. Yeah. 92%, there you go. Okay.
Brilliant. Thank you both
that
very
enough?
much indeed. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so we're going to move on to how you would, if you wanted to, apply to 39 Essex Chambers, what the process is, what we're looking for, that kind of thing. And Judith and Rosie are going to talk us through that. Judith and Rosie, I've been asking everybody else, as you probably heard, what their route was to the bar and what kind of work that they do. So if you could just cover that as well, that would be very interesting. Thank you.
Rosie, do you want to start?
Sure. Hello, my name is Rosie, and I'll start with the introductory bit that Lindsay just mentioned. So my route to the bar, I did an ancient and modern history degree at Oxford with no thought of any career at all, except that I just thought ancient and modern history was interesting. I did the GDL after taking a year to think about things and deciding what to do, and taking some summer jobs and learning to drive and that sort of thing. Did the GDL, the bar course, applied for pupillage, didn't get it. Did 18 months with an American arbitration firm that I got a contact with out of the Wilhelm Sievis arbitration moot. Applied again, and that year 39 was accepting pupils, and I got in. So second time around for me. And I'm going to talk about the paper interview part and pick up some of the pupillage, mini pupillage questions that have been put up on the Q&A chat. And then Judith will talk more about the pupillage interview. So how to apply to 39? Well, the first thing to start with, I think, are the competencies and the criteria that we're looking for. One of the questions is, what are the criteria that you use for the paper set? And then for the interview, it's the same. We have one set of criteria that we use for your pupillage application, your interview, and we also use the same ones for mini pupillage. And we do mark your applications and your interviews according to each category. So do make sure that you cover each category in your application. They are there for a reason. We're not just putting them up there for fun. There is no age-related category. Picking up on a question in the Q&A, we have members of Chambers who have come to us from different walks of life before. We've had people in Chambers who have been anaesthetists, publishers, journalists, all sorts of things, and people have come to Chambers in their 30s, their 40s. I'm not sure if we've yet had anyone in their 50s, but there's time. So age is no barrier here. I suppose really you can be too young, but you can't be too old. So the first criterion that we use is intellectual ability. And there we look at your degrees that you've got, the courses you've done. We might take account of any prizes that you mention. Very important, we do not distinguish or discriminate between universities or schools. So a 2-1 from any university, same credit. First from any university, same credit, doesn't matter. Expressive ability, that's both written and oral, and it includes the ability persuasively to defend a position in argument. Now, that doesn't just come out in your interview, that you can evidence that for us in your written application as well. It really deals with how clearly and how well you explain things. And your evidence for this doesn't just have to be mooting, although that's the classic way to do it. It doesn't have to be. What if you worked in an environment where you had to explain something difficult or complicated to someone, or you distilled lots of information and explained that really clearly? For example, if a relative of yours needed care and support, and you had to explain to the social worker or the local authority what she or they needed, or maybe you had a difficult summer job where you had difficult clients and you had to explain to them how something worked, or whatever it might be. The next criterion is interpersonal skills with solicitors, lay clients, chambers, and other members of the bar. Now, Emily picked up on this in her talk. Of course, not everybody, by the time you're applying for pupillage, will have had an opportunity to demonstrate interpersonal skills with a client. Maybe you haven't had any clients in any capacity before. What we're looking for is how you work with other people. And again, you can bring this out in a written application as well as in your interview. Think about times when you've interacted with other people and something has gone well about that. Maybe you've worked as part of a team. You might have been the football captain at school. You might have set up a club. You might have worked together with some colleagues to produce a report. There's a really broad category of things that you could draw on to show this particular skill. The next criterion is commitment, drive, and efficiency, and the related skills necessary to become a barrister. Now, again, you can bring these out in your written application. We can see that really where your commitments are overlapping. So for example, if during your degree, you also did various sports, you did some music, perhaps you set up something of your own particular interest, you did a lot of reading, perhaps you had caring responsibilities for someone whilst working. There's lots of different ways that you can show your commitment, your drive and your efficiency. And as I said, one way of doing that is to fill your application with things that you have done that you want to tell us about. If there are great gaps of time during which you don't appear to have done very much, that might say to us that perhaps this isn't really one of the criteria where you're going to shine, but you might have extenuating circumstances, and I'll come on to those in a moment. The last criterion is penultimate criterion, interest in one or more areas of law in which Chambers specialises. You would be amazed at how many people put in a mini pupillage application or a pupillage application an area of law that we don't do. That's really bad. Don't do that. As Emily said, attention to detail is pretty important, and understanding what we do in broad terms, fair enough, but do have a look at our website. It's fairly obvious from that. We don't do crime, for example, family, not really something we do, employment a little bit, but not too much. So do read our website, because we are slightly vain in that we'd like to think that you really would like to apply to us as a Chambers, and you're not just generally applying to the bar generally because you want to become a barrister somewhere. We'd like to think you'd like to be with us. So have a look at our website. We set out very carefully the sorts of work that we do and the various areas and sub areas that we do. It is fine, and this was my position, when you're on the GDL and the bar course, you haven't done much law. And perhaps in a law degree, you might be thinking, well, I think I might fancy planning in practice, but I haven't had the chance to do any yet. That's fine, and you can say so. That's not a problem. But you do have to make that effort to have a look and then provide some evidence as to why, although you haven't yet studied it, you think you might like planning or court of protection or whatever it is. Perhaps you've read an article. Perhaps you've seen a talk by someone. Perhaps you've read a book, something like that. It's not really enough just to say, I love commercial law, full stop, and leave it at that. We need a bit more from you than that. The final criterion is interests outside the law. Again, we really do want to know about these. We haven't just written that down there for fun. So, I have seen many pupillage applications which don't deal with this at all, or they put something else in that box that is, again, related entirely to law. What we're looking for here is a flavour of who you are, and we're looking to see that you have interests beyond the law, because being a barrister is a pretty stressful, and it can be an all-consuming job. If you've got things outside your job and your role, that can be a stress relief valve. It can show other qualities, other criteria that you want to demonstrate to us. For example, if you're an absolute fanatic footballer, then you can demonstrate team working skills. You can demonstrate commitment because you go to training every week, whatever it might be. But so do put these in. Do think about the interests outside the law that you'd like to tell us about. And again, we really do mean anything. If you have a family that you care for, or if you set up a charity, or whatever it might be, think really, really broadly and really try and bring out yourself and what you're interested in. Again, if I would warn against being too generic. I like reading. Yep, we all do. Great. What else can you bring to that? Just picking up on the extenuating circumstances I said a moment ago. There is a box both on our mini pupillage application form and on the pupillage application form, I understand, for the Gateway. If something has happened in your life at any point, but particularly if it impacts on, for example, your degree score or your recent activities or whatever. If, for example, you've had a family bereavement, or you've had caring responsibilities that have prevented you from doing, for example, all the mooting that you would want to have done, or something of that nature. If you're comfortable telling us, then do tell us, because if you don't tell us, we can't take it into account. Obviously, that information would not be shared, and we would treat it sensitively. If you're not comfortable telling us, then don't. You're not obliged to. But if we don't know, we can't give you the credit or take it into account in the appropriate way. So those are the criteria. Moving briefly on to a few other points. Do your research before you apply. I appreciate it's very difficult to get a feel for Chambers from the outside, especially now that we're all online, but do give it a go. Most Chambers do blogs. Have a look at those. One thing I did in 2014 as an applicant was to look at juniors' reported cases and read a couple of those for each set and see if that was something interesting that I might like to do. Applications take a long time. You've got, I think, until the 9th of February. Do not leave it till the weekend before, or God forbid, the night before. It takes a long, long time. I suggest you write them out in words so you can edit them properly, get advice from other people, read it aloud so you can hear what it sounds like, and for goodness sake, proofread it. Either print it out. The screen does funny things to one's eyes, I find. Either print it out or take a ruler and go literally line by line through what you've written, because it's not just going to be typos that you'll see. You'll use the wrong word that does spell correctly, but you won't pick up unless you read it really, really carefully. As Emily said, typos, grammatical mistakes, that all matters. Attention to detail matters. You have plenty of time to write this application and you want to put forward your best self. So why put forward something that has mistakes in it? You will get sick of the sight of yours. So I suggest that you swap with somebody else and you proofread each other's. That was something that I did. I think my main piece of advice about what you're writing in your application, as you're writing, think about it from the point of view of your reader. So the people reading your applications are going to be self-employed barristers. They're reading this essentially in their free time, weekends, evenings, etc. I certainly have lots of other things I'd like to be doing at that point. So, and also I don't know you at all. I don't know anything about you or your life other than what you tell me. I know nothing about your context. So explain it all to me and tell me why I should care about what you're writing to me. So for example, if you get a prize, tell me what it's for and what the criteria were. For example, somebody wrote the other day in a mini pupillage application, they got the Queen Mother Scholarship at Middle Temple, and they said nothing else. Now I got it, so I know it's a top award for outstanding candidates for a really great list of criteria, but this candidate didn't tell me, so how will I know? If you've got a fantastic prize, say that. If you've got a grade from a different, if you've got a grade from somewhere, for example, if you're from America, or if your scores are from Scotland even, or Europe or Asia, do explain what that means to us. We might not know unless you tell us. Even if you got an A at A level before A stars were invented, or if you've got a numbered GCSE, which would mean you are horribly young, rather than letters, perhaps explain how that correlates, so that we can understand just how great your scores are. I think the last thing that I will say is every sentence that you put in your application, think about how it goes towards one of the criteria. If you write, for example, I did a mini pupillage, I had a conference and I read some case papers. How does that help me, the marker, the reader? If you tell me I worked in a shop or at a summer camp, how does that help me, the reader? How do I decide from that whether you get an interview? How does that tell me whether you meet our criteria? What I want from you is what you took from that experience, or how that helps you, or how that will help you at the bar. So at my summer job or at my summer camp, I managed a conflict between some colleagues and my skills improved. Or whilst I was on a mini pupillage, a witness did this in court and the barrister responded that way, and that taught me X about advocacy. What I want to know is why these things will help you. I'm not interested in just a list of experiences. So a handy shortcut for this is to ask yourself about every sentence, if I were reading this application, why would I care about that sentence I've just written down? And that might help you to sort of really think about what your application is saying. We've got a question in the box about mini pupillage. So mini pupillages are ongoing at the moment. Our 2022 into 2023 scheme will open for applications sometime at the end of summer, early autumn. It will of course need to respond to COVID, so do keep checking our website, but our applications are closed at the moment. I'm just going to have a quick flick through the questions to make sure there's nothing else. Yes, mini pupillage opportunities during COVID have been challenging to find. Will this be taken into consideration during applications if we haven't done many? If you tell us that that has been your experience, then yes, we will. You don't need to have done X number of mini pupillages to get a pupillage. Obviously do say the ones that you have done, but no, we won't discriminate against you if you've only done one or two. I think that's probably enough from me. Judith, do you want to talk about interviews?
So I'm Judith Ayling QC. I am one of the joint heads of Pupillage, and I've been involved in pupillage for quite a long time. Just starting with my route to the bar. So I did a degree in modern languages. Before I went to university, I didn't know any lawyers at all. And when I was at university, I didn't really think much of the lawyers that I knew. I thought they were really boring. But I just didn't know what lawyers did when they went on and worked, basically. And I then worked in publishing for about 10 years in academic publishing. I had a good time mostly, but I thought that it wasn't going to last me for the rest of my working life. And by that time, in my mid-30s, I did know some lawyers, solicitors and barristers who I thought had really interesting jobs. And that at its best, being at the bar was a combination of the academic and the practical, which I thought would suit me. And at its best, that's what this profession is in fact all about. And so I gave up my job at 35 and did the law conversion course, and then I did the bar course, and then I got pupillage at 39 Essex, and I have been here ever since, which is now more than 20 years. So I was in my late 30s by the time I started work as a barrister, so I'm an example of how that can all work. It wasn't without its challenges. It's quite difficult to give up a job where you've been reasonably senior to go right back to the beginning, but happily it's all worked out. And I think that some of the skills in my old job really were transferable. So those are client skills, for instance. So I'm just going to talk a bit about the process once we get your applications through the gateway. Just picking up on what Rosie has said, we do recognise, of course, that you are largely using a standard form. So we mark it according to our criteria, but we know that most of it is standard. But we think that our criteria are sensible and largely what other sets are going to be looking for. So I think the advice that she's given you is advice that can be taken into account generally when you're filling in the gateway form. Where you get the opportunity to be specific to us, obviously use it. And that's where we want you to show that you thought hard about why you want to come to 39, why you might be interested in our areas of work. I will also say I deliberately chose a set like 39 because it had quite a broad range of work. I wasn't sure exactly what I wanted to end up doing. I now practice in clinical negligence and personal injury and costs and funding. That wasn't really where I thought I would end up, but I'm glad that I came to a broad set because what I do I really like and it suits me. And just picking up on one other thing that Rosie said, I think it's really, I would like to stress that your experience as you set it out in the form and draw on it doesn't have to be fancy. We don't need you to have done 7 mini pupillages in fancy sets to get a pupillage placed with us. Some people have sort of run Canada and been in the Olympics. But there are people, of course, who have done a degree part-time, who have juggled that with childcare responsibilities. That's part of what working life is all about. We've got barristers with that sort of background in Chambers. I couldn't do lots of pupillages, mini pupillages, because I had to take time off work to do them and then time off work during the conversion course. So we're not expecting that that's what you'll have done. So once we get the applications into Chambers, and we do get quite a number, as you will imagine, we apply the criteria, the same criteria that Rosie's already talked you through, so I won't go through those again. We've, of course, all had training in dealing with applications, and we train the people who look at the applications. The first thing we do is what we call a paper sift, so we go through the paper applications, we divide them into groups, we mark them by the criteria. Each application will definitely be looked at by more than one person, and in past years, I don't think we're going to change that this year. It will be 3 people, and then we put the groups of scores together. If you've done a good mini pupillage with us, and we mark the work, as you know, that will pull you up if you're in a marginal position into an interview slot, or it can. What it won't do is pull you down if you've already got an interview slot, if you've done a bad mini pupillage. And if you haven't done a mini pupillage at all, it doesn't mean that we will therefore mark you down. We'll look at you exactly the same as everybody else, including those who have done a mini pupillage. And we recognise, as I've said already, that not everyone can do lots of mini pupillages, and getting a mini pupillage with us is itself a competitive process. Not everyone can have one. So once we've then chosen people for the first round interview, we usually first round interview somewhere between 50 and 60 people. That varies a bit depending on how many applications we get. I think 2 years ago when Chris was applying, we were just being struck by COVID. We managed to keep going with the interview process, but we did have to do the first round interviews by phone that year. I think some sets stopped the process altogether and in fact deferred pupillages that were already going on. We didn't do any of that. We managed to keep going, but we did them the first round by phone. Last year we did both rounds by video. This year we haven't yet made final decisions. Obviously it's all a bit COVID dependent, but I think it's likely we'll have to do them by video. But that will apply then to everybody. I think it perhaps wouldn't be helpful to have some people in person and some people by video, but we'll have to see. At first round, we give you, there's a bit of general chat. We give everybody the same questions so that it's fair. We'll probably give people one legal-ish question, one not so legal question. We try not to favour people who've done more law than other people because we recognise experience will be different at the stage of applications. We then put somewhere between 10 and 15 people through to second round interview, which will be with a different panel of probably 3 people. The first round interviews are usually 3 people too. We usually give a case out in advance for you to look at. About 24 hours in advance generally. We will give you some questions on that case, and then we'll ask you questions about one other topic, and then we put everything together and make our decisions about who we're going to offer pupillage to. And we stick strictly to the gateway process, I should say. It might be helpful to give some general points about interviews. There isn't necessarily a right answer to any of the questions that we give. Think carefully about the structure of your answers and try and be logical. But if you get in a bit of a tangle with one of your answers, I think it's fine to say so and to say, I've rethought that, I need to start again, and this is now my answer. So, and that's part of what practicing at the bar is in fact all about. It's just being sensible, really. If we are going to do interview with Zoom, obviously try and make sure, and we will help you with this, try and make sure that the tech is working, that you've got a background that isn't full of your furry animals. In fact, I think this year we may give people a neutral background to use if they want to use it. Ensure that you're somewhere quiet and that we can hear you clearly. But if you get an interview, we will send out some guidance before you have that interview to help you with all of this. And I think it's really important to say, if you get an interview, don't, and in fact at the paper application stage too, don't come into it assuming that we're trying to destroy you or be very negative. The opposite is true. We really are willing you on to do well. And it's your opportunity to shine, really. I know it's easy for me to say that sitting here, but really don't come into it assuming that we're going to be negative and critical. We are willing you on to do well. And so if, as I've already said, if you have to go back and say, I think I got that answer slightly wrong, what I would like to say is this, that's fine. We understand why that happens. I think you will have seen from our website what we're actually offering in terms of pupillage starting next year. It's up to 3. That probably means 3, but that depends on our candidates. The pupillage award for next year is £70,000, and £5,000 of that is by way of guaranteed earnings in the second 6. And if you earn more than 5,000 in the second 6, that would then be on top of the award. And we allow, and people generally use at least some of this facility, up to £15,000 of that award you can have in advance over the bar course year or for relevant postgraduate study to help you with fees before you come to do pupillage, and you can just come and discuss that with us. So that's a swift overview of our application process and what we do when we get your paper applications. I hope that's helpful. If there are questions, I will now look to see what there are, and Lindsay will tell me if there's anything that I should deal with straight away.
I think that was brilliant. That was really brilliant. And what we've had in the Q&A is that was brilliant. Thank you very much. It was really helpful and clear. that somebody's asked about letters of recommendation. We wouldn't look at letters of recommendation. We don't ask for them. They're not part of the pupillage gateway process. They wouldn't be looked at. No. They would be split off. All of our forms are anonymised. Everyone's had training. It's about evidencing. So I think quite a lot of the questions, the answer is think about, are you evidencing the criteria?
And I would just endorse what Rosie has said about that. So we're not looking for examples necessarily from the law, because most of you won't have had it. So if you say, I had a summer job where I had an incredibly difficult client and I had to deal with it in this way as an example of interpersonal skills, that's fine. We look at that just as carefully as if you gave an example based on an internship that you've done with one of the big legal firms over the summer. Sorry, Lindsay, I slightly jumped in, but I just evidence from whatever, but evidence-based or competence-based is certainly really helpful, because talking in generalities doesn't really enable us to process, to evaluate the application properly.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. Thank you very much. I mean, there's been some questions around sort of pitfalls and, you know, what makes, you know, standout application. And, you know, I think we've answered most of those. I think what I would say from my experience of it is that all of our applications are excellent. You are competing in a pool of other people who are all excellent, and you somehow have to make yourself stand out. So do think about that. Be very careful about humor. What one person's humor doesn't always work, you know, for the person reading it. And remember that the people reading it, wherever you're going to, whichever set, they're reading a lot of applications. So you need to be clear and succinct. And I would really echo Rosie's point in common pitfalls. If there are mistakes in it, you know, you won't look as good as the person who they read next who doesn't have mistakes in it. So it is really very, you know, critical that you have your forms, you know, read again. I think that we've pretty much covered all of the questions around interviews criteria, and there's a lot of questions around mini pupillage. If you have done no mini pupillages at all, that doesn't matter. You can evidence the things that you need to evidence in other means through, you know, caring, jobs, you know, what you've done at school and what you've done at university. You can evidence things in other ways, and it doesn't have to be mini pupillage. There's been a lot of questions around that. I'm just going to...
Can I just add one more thing about the selection criteria? Looking at quite a lot of the questions, and there's one particularly directed at me about client care and building relationships. There are several questions about other work experience or previous experiences. I think from the little potted bios we've given, you can see a lot of us have worked in other areas or in other fields or in other and completely different jobs before we came to the bar. And that's true for many people in Chambers. It's also true for lots of people didn't. But any experience you have in life all adds to what you do. It's not necessary, but it's all helpful. What I was specifically meaning about client care is actually everybody has to learn how to care for clients as a barrister. Some people will have lots and lots of experience of work, and that gives them a certain skill set. Some people have no experience of work at all. But everybody has to relearn or learn for the first time how to work as a barrister. But in terms of your own experience, absolutely putting down in your application what you bring to your application and to the bar and to our application criteria is really relevant, whether it's a long-standing previous career or whether it is a baby-faced freshener straight out of university. Sorry to interrupt, but I just thought I might just wrap that all up in one go.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. Right, there has been one interesting question. All the questions have been brilliant. So can I thank all of you out there for all those great questions? Thank you very much indeed. If you've got questions, I am still going to sweep some up now, but if you've got any other questions that you think of or want answered, then please do email me. You'll find my name on the web, my details on the website. I didn't actually introduce myself. I'm Lindsay Scott. I'm the Chief Executive. I've been here for 4 years. I'm a solicitor by training and was a shipping litigator before I then became a general counsel at a PLC and then went to the bar to work with barristers, which I really enjoyed. So why did I come to 39? I was in the lucky position of having several job offers, and I came here because I really like the people here more than the other places that I was offered a role at. I was invited to a party and I thought it was great. But the people were all very normal. I couldn't tell who the barristers were, who the staff were. There were children running around. You know, people were just very, very friendly. One of the question that we have been asked is, what was your biggest fear when you first started at the bar? And I'm going to pick on a few of you to ask that question to in a minute. So I'm giving you 30 seconds to prepare yourselves. Working visa. If you need a visa to be working in the UK, then you need to speak to the Bar Council. You don't speak to the individual sets that you're applying to. You go and speak to the Bar Council and you get that sorted with them. Which side do we act on? You know, do we tend to act on one side rather than the other side? The fantastic thing about being a barrister is that the conflict rules are very different from solicitor conflict rules. We can act on both sides, and we do. And so in the areas where we really specialise, you know, in fact, in all of the areas that we work in, we are often to be found on the opposite sides of the same case. And that will happen in, you know, for all barristers. Do we have plans for expansion? We've grown a lot recently. As Sheraton said when she arrived, there were only 50 barristers and we're now up to about 185. We don't have huge plans for expansion. We will grow as we need to grow in each of our teams so that there is breadth and depth, and we will be growing some more internationally, but we don't intend to become a mammoth set. So it quickly, that is the answer to that. Obviously, the strategy paper is rather long. If you were going to have a baby during pupillage, what would happen? We would say congratulations, and you know, we'd be very excited. What would happen would be that obviously your pupillage would probably be extended somehow, and that would be dealt with on an individual basis, because as Rachel very rightly said, everybody is different. Every single person has different needs and in everything that they're doing. The other questions were around ADR. Yes, it is very possible to do ADR, alternative dispute resolution. Lots of our barristers have become arbitrators or mediators or worked in some kind of ADR capacity. Some of them do both council work and neutral work, and some decide just to do neutral work. What are the opportunities for junior tenants in our foreign offices? As David said, he went on secondment to Singapore. A number of our barristers, junior barristers, have done that, and number of our and some of our junior barristers have stayed there for, you know, gone out and worked in Singapore. Do you need to be called in Singapore to work there? No, you don't, but you do if you want to go to the local courts there. Some of our barristers in Singapore are called in Singapore, some are not, and same in Malaysia. Can you do pupillage in Manchester, Singapore or Kuala Lumpur? No, at the moment you can't. All our pupillages, somebody has actually done a pupillage because of COVID, they couldn't travel, but other than for COVID reasons, no, you would need to do your pupillage if you wanted to be a barrister of England and Wales in chambers in 81 Chancery Lane, which is where we're at. I think that I have covered all of the questions. If I haven't, I apologise. I will have another look at them. Right, so just to finish, what was your biggest fear when you first started going to court, David Hopkins?
Well, undoubtedly, it was saying something stupid in court and ruining my client's case. That was definitely a fear. Still is a fear to some extent. But actually, I would say the opportunity that I had to get on my feet very early in second six with what now seemed to me like a fairly sort of straightforward court appearances sort of quickly made me get over that fear. I remember I prepared, I think, probably for 8 to 9 hours for my very first court hearing, spoke for about 5 minutes. But I was glad I had done the 8 to 9 hours prep because it meant I didn't say anything stupid. So I do think the way in which 39 does offer people early experience of speaking in court made me get over that fear perhaps more quickly than I would have done otherwise. I do know I've met barristers at other sets where they haven't actually spoken in court for several years at the start of their career. And I thought that would be absolutely terrifying to get up for the first time 3 or 4 years into practice and have to start addressing a High Court judge. So it was nice to have the baptism of fire of being chucked in early in the deep end to get over that.
Makes for some good stories as well, doesn't it? I'm going to ask one more person, which is Emily.
So I think my fear, my biggest fear has always been and remains all around the travelling, actually. So knowing where to go and how to get there and looking up the train times and being on time, I think that's the thing that makes me, that's in a way that focuses my anxiety. So I'm an obsessive train line checker. And perhaps my very first appearance in court was in High Barnet, and I went to the magistrates court instead of the county court. Rookie error, and indeed I was a rookie, and so I ended up catching a bus between the two courts at about 11 o'clock in the morning. So there was me and a whole load of pensioners, and it was a possession list. So you used to go to court and wear your robes and do possession lists, and basically you had to stand up and say the usual order please about 5 times. I was so late and so terrified, I put my robes on the bus, and when we arrived at the county court, all the pensioners clapped me as I got off and wished me luck. So maybe that's why, but it's all about the travel for me.
Can I just say that Emily passed that wisdom on to me as a pupil and said, find the train that you need to get that will get you there in time, and then get the one before. And that advice was so useful. I once I was meant to be going to Maidstone. I got on the train to Maidenhead by accident, completely different station. And because I followed Emily's excellent advice, I was able to ring the clerks, panic, get off the train, get on the right train and get to court just in time. So thanks, Emily.
Very well.
Brilliant. Right, I'm just going to do a quick scoot around to see if anyone has any final comments that they'd like to make. Colin?
Nothing from me except to vouch and say how sound Emily's advice there was in being on time.
Chris?
No, just good luck to everybody who applies, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it so far, and I hope that everyone else does too.
Hannah?
Just to say all the best of luck with your applications, and if any problems or any questions, don't hesitate to drop me an email. My email address is on the website, like Lindsay's.
Yeah. Rachel? Yeah. Rachel?
No, just good luck and don't worry about it too much.
Ruth?
No, I think like everyone, it's just thanks for Emily's sage advice, which has got me out of a sticky spot, and good luck to everyone with all the applications and everything as well.
Judith?
No, good luck from me. And if in doubt, don't be put off applying because you think it's all too difficult. Have a go and try and follow the advice that we've given you, but good luck with it all.
Yeah. Rosie?
Very quick thoughts. You are competing in a field of stellar candidates, but don't forget that you and your experiences are stellar as well. It's very easy to feel that everybody else is incredibly special and to entirely overlook how great and brilliant you are. So don't do that. And the last thing is that I didn't say in my beginning spiel just how wonderful 39 is. It's the loveliest, friendliest, most supportive place to work. And I have sobbed on people's shoulders and people have sobbed on my shoulders, and everybody helps each other. And like Emily said, my success is their success and theirs is mine. So it's a great place to be. So come along.
David?
Nothing other than good luck, and thanks for joining us today. Last bit of advice from me would simply be, it is a good job, and that's why lots of people want to apply for it and do it. So don't be put off if you get knocked back a few times. Do keep going, keep trying. It is worth it, honest.
And Emily, last but not least.
I think everybody said it. Good luck, and hope favours the bold.
Yeah. So I'm going to close, and I'm going to close by saying thank you all very much for coming. If there is any feedback, do give it to me. Mine would be don't be modest, but be wise. Be confident and self-assured, but not arrogant. And most importantly, what Colin said, I'd really echo what Colin said, be yourself, right? Be yourself all the way through the process and just have faith in yourself. Good luck, and thank you all very much. And thank you very much to all of the speakers today for taking time out and presenting. It's been great, and I've got to know some of you a lot better. So thank you all very much indeed. Bye.